So I want to welcome you to the ESIP January meeting. I am Susan Shingledecker, ESIP's Executive Director. It is truly our privilege to have you here with us this week. We know that each of you have many competing priorities, and we're grateful that you have chosen to be here with us this week. If there is anything that our team can do to help make the most of your time this week, please don't hesitate to let us know. You can pop into the help desk at any time during the week, send us a message via Kiko Chat, Slack, or email. I encourage you, if you can, to put on your out of office reply, dive in, and give us your full attention this week. We have 25 sessions lined up for you, 3 networking coffee breaks, and our afternoon poster session. I especially encourage you to attend the coffee breaks and the poster session, as these are great opportunities to have smaller conversations with old friends and meet new colleagues. I would like to open with a land acknowledgement. The ESIP team works in Maryland, Virginia, New York, Montana, and Michigan. So I want to acknowledge the Piscataway, Nanakoke, Susquehannock, Manahoke, Munsee Lenape, Cheyenne, Salish Kootenai, Absaroka, and Anishinaabe nations and their peoples who have lived on and stewarded these lands long before us, are here with us today and into the future. I challenge all of us in this community to work for justice and to use our minds and voices to include others, especially those from historically marginalized groups. One way we do this in ESIP is through sharing resources with you as a community. I want to highlight the work throughout the year to raise awareness, to expand the reach of work serving Indigenous communities. In the chat, Allison is sharing with you resources that have been featured in recent months. Furthermore, I want to give you some homework. We are excited to be preparing to gather together in person this summer in Asheville, North Carolina. Asheville has a rich Indigenous history with Eastern Cherokee, Catawba, and Miccosukee nations. As we gather this week with a theme of grounded in trust, we know that the foundational trust was broken between the colonists and these nations. 20 years before the Indian Removal Act that started the Trail of Tears, Andrew Jackson once told the Eastern Cherokee, "As long as the sun shines and the grass grows, there shall be friendship between us." I invite you to visit a story map from Buncombe County, North Carolina, detailing this history. I think it will inform our work together and our approach to the July meeting. Let us work to do better and to build real, authentic, and meaningful trust with each other and in the communities where we work and live. To enable and empower this work, ESIP as a community has established community participation guidelines that spell out expected and unacceptable behaviors and how to address and report behavior that falls outside of these guidelines. It is important to recognize with any community of this size, with incredible passion for our work, disagreements and misunderstandings can happen. I encourage you to use the community participation guidelines to understand expectations and to bring any concerns to a member of ESIP leadership, staff, or board, or use the reporting mechanisms outlined in the guidelines. So I am really excited for our theme this year. Grounded in trust, data ethics empowers collaboration. Not because I have all the answers and I'm going to bowl you over with wisdom, but because I have so many questions and I see so much need for work and progress around this area. And I know that this community never ceases to amaze me in terms of what we can accomplish together. So when we announced this theme, I heard 2 primary reactions. One was, wow, Susan, you're really taking on the big stuff head on. Well, yes, we are. The other reaction was, Susan, you know data ethics is a serious field with real expertise. You can't just go lightly. You can't just fake it. No pressure, right? But when I asked for help to identify experts to help us navigate this arena, not many hands shot up. Not many names were put forward. Why do you think that is? So I'm going to take a shot at that. And I think there are 2 main reasons. Firstly, sometimes I think it is hard to see the presence of something like ethics even when it is right in front of you. And secondly, a word with the weight and the seriousness of ethics fuels imposter syndrome in a big way. So, to the first point, someone doing the right thing or making the right decision, it can almost be taken for granted, like clean drinking water coming out of your faucet, something we'll hear about in one of our breakout group, sessions today. But the absence of something or contaminated drinking water is much, much more obvious, urgent, even outrageous. We know unethical actions when we see them. I once confronted a colleague on a matter of ethics, and that was not a fun day. And I will never forget their response. Upon me presenting what I saw, they replied, "Well, Susan, there's ethics with a capital E, and then there's ethics with a lowercase e," when they were justifying their actions. I disagree. Let's just say we didn't work together for long after that, because you can't build trust with someone if you don't feel they are acting ethically. And that's why I see these three terms of trust, ethics, and collaboration intrinsically connected. To my second point, imposter syndrome and the need for expertise. I do not consider myself an expert in the area of ethics. So, in preparation for this meeting, I have been working to soak up anything I can about the state of trust in our world and the latest on data ethics. I sought out every session I could on the topics at International Data Week in Salzburg and at AGU in San Francisco. But I'll be honest, I came away with some really great articles and talks, but I don't know that I feel any more learned on these really huge topics. And then one morning, a few weeks ago, I was scrolling through social media. Have you ever read something on social media that fired you up? No? Never? Yeah, right. I came across a post by Dr. Reed Blackman on LinkedIn. I don't know him. It was actually liked by another member of the ESIP community, which is why I saw it, a feature I really like about LinkedIn. He posted an analogy about AI ethics. He asked if using a rope to rock climb is merely for mitigating risk, or if it enables you to climb. Or if using scuba gear is only to mitigate the risk of drowning or enabling you to dive. He went on to say that AI ethics, like safety gear, mitigates risk, but it also enables us to do amazing and exciting things. I was really intrigued. I love this framing as ethics in our work as risk mitigation or enabling infrastructure to allow us to go further than we could without it. As I scrolled through the comments, there was a lively debate, one I wouldn't be surprised to see here in ESIP, about the difference between ethical AI and responsible AI. But there was one comment that stopped me in my tracks. The original poster, kind of in contrasting ethical versus responsible, he said, "I see them as very similar. I'm just not scared of the word ethics." To which there was a reply later in the thread, quote, "I'm just not scared of the word ethics. That's why I leave ethics to those who studied it." I'll say that again. That is why I leave ethics to those who studied it. Boom. My mind just stopped. Like, what does that even mean? Were they being sarcastic? Possibly. But I paused and I thought about it. Going through life, what if we said, "I'm not a lawyer. I leave understanding legal matters to them. I'm not an accountant, so I don't worry about financial matters. I'm not a doctor, so health doesn't concern me." Or what about those who say, "I'm not an environmentalist, so I don't need to do anything about climate change. I leave that to the experts." Oh, it made me really connect to our work and our choice to make data ethics a focus for this year. Not just data ethics alone, but how they interplay with trust and collaboration. To me, engaging in productive society and in professional spaces requires more from us, expert or not. We cannot just leave ethics matters, discussion and debate to the experts. We have to wrestle with it. We have to get comfortable with discomfort. We have to recognize that it may take a lifetime to truly feel expert enough ourselves. And on top of that, the finish line is moving every day. ASIP, we do hard things all the time, and this is no exception. I look forward to an energizing week where there will be more questions than answers, where all voices are welcome, expert and novice alike, and where we can make real and meaningful progress to advance these issues that are critical to our work and our world. It is now my pleasure to introduce our keynote speaker today, John Havens. I first met John this fall at the U.S. Research Data Summit at the National Academies. John is an author, musician, and actor, and the executive director of the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous and Intelligent Systems. He has a fascinating background, which you can read more about in Sketch, and I am excited for him to share his perspectives with you today. After John's talk, we will have time for questions. We will use Slido for your questions, which you can access through KikoChat. And then we will move into a panel discussion with ESIP board members to reflect on John's remarks and our theme and provide perspective and thoughts to shape our focus for the week and the year ahead. Over to you, John.
Well, Susan, thank you so much. And just to confirm, can you hear me okay? Or if someone just wants to give me a thumbs up somehow, I'll assume you can hear me.
Yes, you sound great.
Great. Okay. And I will also share my screen. Okay, it's you. Okay, and you can see the screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you. Well, first off, Susan, I just have to say thank you so much for your remarks. I turned off my camera at one point because I was just nodding vigorously, and yeah, hopefully you'll see a lot of what I'm going to talk about today echoes what you said. I know Reed, great guy. He helped in different work that we did that I helped lead with our volunteers, and I just love that analogy of climbing. It's a wonderful metaphor. I do want to also acknowledge I am doing this presentation in Piscataway, New Jersey, which is where the Lenape First Nations people have been and still are. And I want to recognize them and say thank you to ESIP and to all the leadership and to Susan and Megan for their kindness in helping me prepare. Okay. The year of being awkward for purpose, not just on purpose, but for purpose. Why social isolation is our greatest ethical challenge and opportunity. And I love what you said, Susan, about ethics. And I'll expand on that. About, let's see, September of 2019, I asked my wife, I said, do you want to go see a couples therapist? We'd been married for 24 years, I think, and knew each other for a couple years before that. And I'm 54, so roughly at least a third of my life. And I said, my kids at the time were age 14 and 17. I said, I'm getting a little freaked out about the kids leaving the nest. I love being a dad, and when they leave, it's going to be hard. I said, maybe we could see a couples therapist. And I thought, what a great, I didn't think this per se, but I was sort of like, this is great. I'm so close to this person that this is just going to help us immeasurably. You know, she's my best friend. So we went to see this therapist that I had found, you know, nice person. My dad was a psychiatrist, so I'm always scrutinizing, you know. And I've written a couple of books involving positive psychology. I'll tell you more about that in a minute. But the therapist said, first session, why are you both here? And I said what I just said. in general. I'm worried about the kids, and we are planning for college soon, and I said my thoughts, and then the therapist turned to my wife and said, "How about you?" And she said, "I don't think I love you anymore." I'm sorry. She said, "I don't love you anymore, and I think I want to leave." Was that TMI? Is that too much information? I bring this up because, and Susan, your words are just perfect. Whatever words one has, and I'm going to speak from my perspective with that experience and expand on it. And then with science and things I've researched and work I've led, bring it back to hopefully be applicable, not just to you as people, but to the field that you're in data science and et cetera. But when you're confronted with something in life that we all go through, maybe not a divorce as I did, but a death in the family, illness of a child, any situation that would be something you might call a crisis of social isolation. Do you feel you're equipped to handle that situation? Now, here's what happened to me. Okay, and I'll tell you more about my history in a moment, but I just want to reiterate, here's the position that I'm still in. My dad was a psychiatrist. He passed away. My mom is a minister in the Methodist Church. I've written 2 books on positive psychology. I have 2 wonderful children. My mom is still alive. I have all these wonderful friends. And Susan, thank you for, obviously your organization. You talk about tough issues with indigenous colonization. So I'll say this, I'm privileged because I'm a white 54-year-old male in America. So the veils of privilege I have, I'm aware of, but more in the past 4 years than ever. All those things, I say all those things to point out how equipped I was to deal with what was and still is the singularly most painful thing I've ever experienced in an instant. In an instant, everything at the foundation of who I am inexorably changed in an instant. My current therapist has said it is formally a form of PTSD. Okay, I'm going to put words over here for a second and just tell you again my experience. Right away, I told people this happened, and people say, like, that's rough, right? And by the way, I'm not going to talk about my ex or that situation. I've certainly found out areas of improvement, meaning this is not me saying, like, this person happened and this did this. This is me saying this situation brought itself to me. And my kids are doing great. My ex is great. So it's all good now. But here's what I faced at the time from other people. We're in a work setting right now, right? Meaning you've asked me to speak for a corporate oriented setting. And I'm talking to you still about my divorce. Am I TMIing too much? And here's the thing that I faced, and I can still face it sometimes. This quote, it's not appropriate to talk about your divorce at work, and you need to find a therapist. Who says it's not appropriate? Now, it might be human resources, right? And by the way, there's TMI and there's TMI. I understand. But the point is that the reality that was given to me was not something I could separate so cleanly as to be like, okay, I'm good. I wasn't good. I wasn't good. Here's what those statements actually mean. And again, because of how Susan spoke and when we prep for this, I know, I think it's this crowd also will get this. This is what people were saying to me for real. Society says it's not appropriate for you to talk about your divorce. And then the second thing, the only advice I'm equipped to give you is, hey, you need to find a therapist. What I think they also were saying at a much deeper level is this. This is what I saw in people's eyes. Some people told me this. And by the way, this is people who are friends. They always were speaking with empathy, like they weren't cruel. But there was this look a lot that happened. And this is what I sensed they were thinking. Some of them even told me this. It terrifies me to think that what happened to you could happen to me. And I'm not equipped to deal with your pain or my own. I am not equipped. Doesn't mean they didn't care. They weren't equipped. I was equipped. Here's my bio. I was an actor, professional actor for about 15 years in New York City. I've written for The Guardian. My dad's a minister. My mom's a minister. My dad's a psychiatrist. As an actor, you study human behavior. This is my book in 2008. Led me to know about social media. I was writing about podcasting, running events before it became a thing in 2007. 2014, I wrote a book about ways to track your data and your health, mental and physical, using devices. And then 2016, I wrote this book that led me to come to IEEE, which is focusing on tracking essentially your values in regards to artificial intelligence. I had the honor of working with about 700 volunteers at IEEE to create this document, Ethically Aligned Design. Reed was one of them. And we were doing this work back in 2016. Then I was helped create the 7,000 Standards series, from what I understand, the first time at IEEE that socio-technical standards, those ideas came together. And I helped create a standard focused on well-being and AI. And now I help lead work on sustainability with a project called Planet Positive 2030, where I've been able to start from a Western perspective, at least, the wisdom of non-Western traditions and indigenous thinking and wisdom, so I can see the planet as a person that I think she is. I use the term her for the planet. I say all this about, look how in one sense equipped I was, right? Because all the things up until except the last one, when my wife left, I wasn't yet working in sustainability. But look how well I was equipped, right? Good job and all that. And yet what happened in that moment when those words came, I equated to like a spear, I equated to like something that literally stopped my heart. There's a lot of science saying about breaking heart. It's got a lot of true aspects to it. But all I know is that every breath I took for months, I couldn't escape the feeling of isolation that overcame every aspect of who I am. And then COVID hit. This happened to me in September of 2019. Then COVID hit, and I stayed in the house with my ex and my kids. And there were some good aspects to it, but all I want to say is, like, I experienced an isolation around other people, with other people I could call on, that I would not wish on anyone ever, 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 ever. This is why social isolation, I believe, is our greatest ethical challenge and opportunity. It's a challenge and an opportunity. So here's the good news. This is my new hero. Most of my heroes are women, but I have a little man crush on Dr. Vivek Murthy, if I can say that. He's our current Surgeon General. He's the only Surgeon General to be voted twice, apparently. I think it's elected or voted in or whatever, but twice in American history. He's also the only, I believe, American official who has used the Bhagavad Gita to do his oath to enter office. This person has put out a report with the title, Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation. He is our chief Surgeon General. He's a medical doctor, and he's saying to the world, this is an epidemic. It's not hyperbole. It's not a fake term. Anyone can go toe-to-toe with the guy if they want. My dad was a doctor, medical doctor. I'm not one. But look at what he's saying. We have an opportunity and an obligation to make the same investments in addressing social connection that we have made in addressing tobacco use, obesity, and the addiction crisis, right? So we have to recognize that as a nation, we must prioritize compassion over convention, or our air quote ethics. And Susan, I love the capital E small e thing, as you were saying. I believe that our ethics as a society equates to saying, I would rather people, this sounds kind of harsh, I'm going to unpack this, but I would rather let people suffer and die, including myself, than identify how to proactively care for myself and others and start trying. Here, the thing is, I'm not saying that proactively people are saying this consciously, right? They're not walking around going like, I'm going to let those people die. I'm saying society right now, I believe, in my experience, and as I've just portrayed it to you, in one sense is saying, because it's so awkward, Western society especially, it's so awkward, and people don't want to necessarily be, it's invasive if they are lonely or solitary. You should leave them alone. The science doesn't say that. The science says it's a pandemic, right? But we are given permission with current ethics and current convention to give ourselves permission or other people. And then, but what we're actually saying or doing without meaning to is those people are suffering, because isolation is the same as smoking, according to Dr. Murthy, 15 cigarettes a day in terms of the negative physiological aspects. It's same as having aspects of diabetes. And the UK and others have shown for years that isolation, and I'll unpack isolation versus loneliness, isolation takes up to 12 to 14 months off of people's lives and also makes us die sooner because we have not been trained and equipped and immersed in a spirit of compassion that says it's okay that it's hard, but not enough people are telling you that you're worth it. And that even when you have all these other messages, do this, focus on this, AI can do this better than humans, all these different messages, the ultimate message is still you have worth. You're worth doing this. And you know why you have worth? One of the main reasons is because your kindness to someone else may keep them alive. And think of the joy, by the way, right? This is kind of heavy so far. Who is this guy? We're talking about data ethics for 4 days. Who is this guy? My thing is, I have 2 kids, right? I went through this experience. I can't take this experience and then just let it weigh me down the rest of my life. I have to learn from it. And more importantly, I thought, you know what I could do in that moment? And I was just talking to my mom about this, driving here to Piscataway. I kid you not. Mom's amazing. My mom, when I was a kid, got bullied a lot because I was a fat kid. It's a pretty common story. I went home, cried, whatever. It formed a lot of who I am. It's you can read about that in Hacking Happiness. But the thing is, I said to mom, what do I do? And mom said, pretty much a quote, you can always find someone who is suffering more than you. True. And then secondly, she said, go and try to help them. It will make you feel better. Mic drop for mom. That's what years, I've written 2 books on positive psychology. I work with some of the leading colleagues I know in the world, at least in the English speaking world, who can tell you about the tech that does this and does that and does this and does that. The science and compassion of altruism shows, put someone under an MRI, you're kind to someone else, all the happy hormones, they go up. You put galvanic skin temperature badges, wristbands on someone, their stress goes down simply by doing one of 2 things, being kind to someone else, receiving a kindness, or here's the third thing, watching an act of kindness. How freaking cool is that? Right? I sit and watch Virgin River, that show with my partner, my girlfriend. I can't tell you how many times one or both of us is just like, I need a minute. I need a minute. Oh man, Virgin River. Like, it's because you're watching kindness. That physiologically heals us. Right? Okay. I have about 15 minutes left, so I'm going to try to unpack some more good news, even though it's going to sound like it's bad news. But when there's an urgent signal that gives us permission to act in ways that we need and we didn't know about, that's a gift, right? Right now, isolation for me, I feel like it's 6 months before COVID. And someone has told me, hey, John, here's what COVID means. I don't know about all of you, but when COVID first came out, I was like, what is this? It's an acronym, right? And then I was like, what do I do? But I remember vividly the first time I went to Whole Foods when I wore a mask. And I work in the realm of the invisible, right? I was an actor, I'm a writer, I'm a musician, which I haven't said yet, but most of the world I live in is invisible. You can't point to it and say there's music, right? I mean, you can, there's the band, but the visceral interpretation of how that music hits us, right? That's invisible. Anyway, I walked into Whole Foods. I remember walking around in sheer terror, wearing a mask, looking around, and it wasn't like there were purple granules floating in space. But I knew if I take this mask off and breathe, apparently I might not last as long as I could. And I've had COVID like twice, right? You might have all as well. Well, this isolation epidemic is also a pandemic. I looked this up, going into the Mayo Clinic, and a couple other slides I'll show you in a minute. When an epidemic or an epidemic in one country or one disease or whatever moves to multiple countries, and forgive me if this is not the best definition, but apparently it turns into a pandemic. And the World Health Organization last December echoed Dr. Murthy from the US's results. In the US, 1 in 2 Americans struggles with isolation, leading to these negative effects, a 25% increase in the risk of early death. Early death. Now it's a pandemic, right? And you can read over to the right, like all the reasons I tell people at work, and I'm trying to get different programs going where when people don't get it, because it's so hard to talk about this, I walk in and I say, well, let's save $154 billion annually. Boom. Okay. $6.7 billion per year. That's what Medicare says they spend helping socially isolated adults. That's just adults. I haven't told you the fact that teens, suicide and these isolation rates are through the roof, right? What are the answers? What are the answers? Oh, this is hard. Well, let's get back to work. Or I'll talk about more in a minute. Let's let AI take care of it. AI bots will help deal with this problem. Epidemic versus pandemic, right? The whole point is I'm trying to make this clear. This is a thing. And the same way that ethics, capital E, small e, and I don't want to speak for Susan, but I think what I interpreted from what Susan said is someone hurt her or she was concerned about something and she tried to talk to a colleague and it happened. This is happening. So I want to create awareness as one key takeaway, not to bring you fear, but to bring you permission to say for yourself or for those you love, the words you share with them of kindness and compassion today. It might sound extreme. You don't know the lives you're going to save with what you say is a tiny act of kindness. I can't take time today to text my mom. And I'm not saying you have to text your mom like, I love you more than life itself, right? Text her, I'm thinking of you. Boom. Those words, when I first went through what I went through, I kid you not, life-saving. So the title for your event, Grounded in Trust, Data Ethics and Power Collaboration. Great title. I helped, 700 people. I was part of the process. I wrote some of the chapters, 3 versions of one of the largest AI principles in the world, helped create standards and all this stuff. So I can talk about this. I know Reed, I know all these different people working in AI governance, Gen AI, currently in the EU, currently in NIST, in the States, around the world. I've been to China, Taiwan, boom, all this different, great. Grounded in care, virtue ethics, and empower trust is great. Trust is important. You know what's easier for me? What I knew, I just felt viscerally when I first told people about what I was going through, how I actually established trust pretty quickly with someone who actually listened to me and who showed that they were willing to care. Now, most people would be, they weren't rude. They weren't like, oh, sorry to hear, dude. Anyway, pass me the chips. They'd be like, oh my gosh. And then would sit with me for a minute. But there was like an allotted amount of time that society said, right, that's cool. Now you got to move on. It's their problem. But here's the thing about isolation. That's actually glorious news. It brings us all together because every human struggles with it in some level. And again, I'll talk more in a minute about loneliness. By the way, loneliness is like eating and drinking. This is what the science says. We all feel it. You might say, but I'm an introvert. I'm an extrovert. Wonderful. This is how you find your energy. You might say, I like being alone. Solitude in nature brings me happiness. Awesome. I can show you studies, how many people that applies to. All those types of people around the world, doesn't make a difference who you are. You still need at a physiological level, at a spiritual, mental, physical level, you still need social connection. Now, social connection can mean you have 4 family members, extended family members. Social connection means you talk to your postman, the librarian, and you get your coffee and you connect, right? The point is we are literally built because back apparently in caveman times, hunger and food and water, pretty basic. That's why we need it or we die. The loneliness thing apparently is because say there was a large cheetah or whatever approaching you from behind, you would die if you didn't have other people to help you. So apparently that's so imbued into who we are, into our DNA. We yearn, we have a physical, what some people call in the biz, skin need, pheromonal to connect with other people. Technology can help in so many ways. Wonderful. It cannot replace, or if it does, we haven't enough time to figure that out. And also, Only 50% of the world, I think it's maybe up to 60% of the world, has access to the internet. Think about this all the time with AI conversations. Plus, God bless Verizon. My Wi-Fi dies all the time. What happens if the solutions to helping people are bots that are powered by technologies that aren't available to everyone, or God bless them, sometimes turn off? I have a secret. It's a glorious, beautiful secret. We have the gifts within us to help ourselves and others. And you know the cool thing? If you're like, I'm not sure how to help myself, here's my mom's advice: help someone else. I can point to so much science showing you how altruism can help you. If we equip ourselves to understand and experience the visceral healing power of compassion, we equip ourselves to care beyond convention. That's the year of being awkward. I'm not awkward anymore about talking about my divorce to a bunch of strangers because I don't think you're strangers. I haven't met you. You know, you're just friends I haven't met yet. But okay, there's that. But also, I know you have children. You have aunts and uncles and colleagues that, Lord willing, with what I'm saying today, not because of John, but because if you go, I'm going to try this out. I'm going to say a kind word to someone. You've done this. But now track when you're doing it. A lot of my research in social science is about when you give yourself permission to track. That's when you're telling yourself, I'm worth tracking, I'm worth measuring, and you start to prove to yourself the value of doing something. We all have done this. I'm doing it right now with the scale. I'm trying to lose some weight. So the detestable machine, it's not really even a machine, I think, but you stand on this thing and it goes like this and it evokes a lot of moods in one person, right? But you do it over a course of time as a tool, right? And people are like, John, hacking happiness in 2014, all these things to track yourself. You're going to minimize, the joy of like being with your family. You're tracking your values. Come on, that's going to mess it. No, don't let those messages keep you from tracking the things you need to track. I'll explain that more in a minute. You are worth tracking. Your care for other people's must be tracked now. Look at the permission we all have. It's a pandemic. No one said, hey, here's a mask. And I'm not going to talk about the political issues with masks or vaccines. The point is when COVID happened, most of us pretty quickly were like, let me do something. And it became all of our conversations. It became all what we did here 6 months before. I mean, it's already a thing, the pandemic of isolation, but we can deal with it. I won't spend too much time on this because I don't want to sound negative to artificial intelligence systems. Always use that word, systems, because you are the data experts. No AI lives in isolation. You don't have a car that is AI. The car is imbued with algorithms tied to data, most of it ours. So data governance is actually what should always be talked about with AI systems. Nonetheless, there's tons of articles right now about how AI can have companion robots, right? Whether it's large language models or chatbots, they look so real, they feel so real, they can replace human therapists, right? I have friends in Japan, the Shinto tradition, for instance, animism. There's a lot of people who want to attribute a sentience to machines. That's, I'll call it either faith-based or a cultural-based issue. That's awesome in one sense, meaning not here to judge Japan or whatever. But the point is, most of these tools also do this crazy thing of marketing. And where we don't have full access to our data and we're not given genuine consent about how we access this data, then manipulation can happen a lot of times in seniors, certainly with kids. And this is a really good article. I'm sure you're probably reading and hope you are. At the end of it, they say this really good paragraph, right? With the right approach and careful consideration, AI chatbots can play a critical role in addressing the loneliness epidemic and positively impacting society. Love that. Couple of things. This image shows the robot talking to a happy teen. So the image already shows, here we are, guys. Anyone look at this picture? This is now, not the future. Buy a robot for your daughter. Boom, put it in the room. There it is. Look how happy she is talking to Chatty Chat Chat. Well, first of all, the organization that wrote the thing is a software company. So there's FYI. And as a former journalist, disclosure is a thing. And secondly, is this thing, loneliness epidemic and positively impacting society. What does positively mean? Is it in the current world of convention that I talked about already? Because then in one sense, it's hidden. So I already gave you my resume. The point here is that I've done work in AI ethics for about 10 or 11 years. I wrote a book on the subject. The thing is, people will say like, AI robots won't replace people. The work that you're doing, I think, the work that we're doing is to say, unless there's formal governance, either saying, here's where we can't have robots or machines do something, or we give guidance to say and define what we mean by ethics, responsibility, and care. That's when the individual, the country, whatever else, can make decisions for themselves, right? It's an evolved form of safety that really means responsibility. But as I've been working in well-being for years, and that's ecological flourishing and human well-being as defined and accountably recognized by metrics on an ongoing basis, that's where you can say, I know that we're giving back more to the planet and to people than we're taking away. It's not just avoiding risk, because in one sense, you avoid risk, and what happens? You sit in a room. I think I'm not at risk. But now, my divorce, your situation, anybody being human, the risk is not saying, but what about this loneliness epidemic? It's a thing. Well, why aren't we building all of our machines not to replace humans, but to help complement, even by turning the technology off, this awareness, this burning need to care for each other and love each other? I'm going to go a little longer. From my understanding, I had about half an hour to speak, and then from noon to 12:30, we're doing Q&A, if that's okay, and let me know if I should do something else. This is the list about large language models, if anyone wants to get into it. Basically, I took this list from the amazing Dr. Timnit Gebru, who is a hero, never met her, but she has a wonderful article called The Bad Science of LLMs. First of all, there's a lot of other AI technologies that are not large language models, deep learning, machine learning, all that type of stuff. There's so much focus on LLMs. This is a list of the things that are just errors. It's like a car. Someone saying, look how fast that car goes. And like, yeah. And like, well, it blows up like 5 out of 10 times. Okay. And by the way, when you sit in the car, it teaches you how to be a racist. Whatever. It's so cool. It goes so fast. No, scientists on this call. This is the problem with these things. Anyway, I don't want to focus on this part too much. I get all riled up. But this is the coded convention version of, right? Saying AI will take care of this, technology will take care of this, without facing the need for ourselves to say, I am worth tracking my kindness because I can help someone else. It's the coded convention of I'd rather let people suffer and die, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. If you want one article, and I mentioned this to Susan in preparation, to please read any data scientist with their weight in salt, it's this paper. I read a lot of papers, write a lot of papers. From Rationality to Relationality by Sabelo, a friend named Sabelo Guntu from Africa, talking about Ubuntu ethics. And you can read this while I'm talking. But if you are like I am, so mired in Western rationality, right? It's imbued in aspects of the Declaration of Independence, the Constitution. By the way, nothing wrong with rationality. Please do not hear me say rationality is bad. What I am saying, he explains it so beautifully in 3 words: rationality to relationality. As Westerners, we still have physiological and mental constraints or gifts. We yearn for and need human connection. So if someone says, whether it's Rousseau or, Milton Friedman or insert name here, we can do it on our own. That's not what the science says. And that's also not what maybe more than half the world says if they're not from the West. So Ubuntu ethics, society of virtue ethics, we are defined by our community. We are gifted with the opportunity to commune with each other. And from rationality and relationality, I know as a musician, right? The vibe, the spirit, the consciousness of music with other musicians. As an actor, I know this, the physical, visceral aspect of being in front of an audience. It's there, even though I don't point to it. We have tools to have permission to know we're going there when the lights go down. Permission world, you can now be a part of the consciousness that is theater. Permission now, band is warmed up. Here you go. Anyway, please read this paper. Here's the reason if anyone's like, well, why? Why, John? Why do we have to focus on isolation right now? It's really hard. Here's why. Kids and the planet. That's it. That's it. I can't say how many times people are like, kids sit around at the table and they text each other and they make this face. People my age or older. They text each other. And the idea is like there's something wrong with them. Newsflash, if you're over like 20 something and you work in the space, We have trained them, not just on the tools and the technology. And again, this is not about the technology. This is about not necessarily giving them the tools, which include, hey, put the tools down, let's be together, and then showing them why. But in terms of planet and kids, whatever anyone wants to say, but like if long term we aren't thinking about how to design AI amongst all other tools where data and the actual manifestation of the algorithms, the morphology of the robots, whatever, first and foremost, first question is, can I build this knowing it gives back more to the planet? That's called regeneration, regenerative design. Meaning not just not harm the planet. Hey, I made this car and the emissions are lower. Cool. What's the end of life for the metal? Is it going to go into the ground and waste and harm water? How about the materials, the electronics? Is it coming from lithium or cobalt? What are the human rights aspect of where the cobalt comes from? Oh, circular design and the next level regenerative design. And then kids. Can we say, and I so appreciate Susan opening us up with a land acknowledgement, because 7 generations, what if that was an engineering policy-based data scientist remit that you had to say, I know how this product or how this data is going to be used for 7 generations, right? Which is what, 100 years per generation, 700 years. I can guarantee that this will not only not harm people, it will improve their mental health and well-being according to all these different, trusted sources, and it will improve the planet. Could you imagine? Versus just, hey, this one thing I built just now, it's not causing emissions. That will not keep us safe. Okay, more good news, and I guess I'm just going to go till noon unless someone tells me to stop. This looks really simple, and this is why it's wonderful. Again, if you're American, I should say that, forgive me, there may be a lot of folks not from the States, but the logic is the same. Major famous physician who says, do this, 5 actions for 5 days. Commit to connect. Look at this card. You can print it up on the site, but it's pretty simple, right? How I connected today. I called mom to say thank you. How did it make you feel? Happy and grateful. Boom. You're probably thinking, this is like watching a Hallmark special. Like, I couldn't be simpler. Yes. Amen. Simplicity. But what it means is you have permission, right? You can say to your colleagues, well, apparently this is the thing that U.S. Surgeon General said I should try this out. Fine. Wonderful. Right? Whatever permission you need, give it a shot. And then you see how you feel. You will experience. It's almost the same in one sense. If I said, here's a pill, it's safe, try it out. It's going to save a year of your life. By the way, Dr. Murthy says this all the time. For free, here's a pill, try it out. It saves a year of your life. That is what the science says. Can you imagine? I hope this is a gift to you. It is to me. If I am kind to other people, I will actually save a year of my life. I kind of feel like I have a year. If I took a year off from work, from productivity, from this, I could save a year of my life. Well, maybe I save a year of your life. I'm taking that year off. Sabbatical, right? Radical sabbatical. Okay, if you ever want, this is for ESIP, just to know, I've created a workshop. It's free, not interested in money, but I utilize a lot of what I'm talking about here in the workshop, positive psychology, for people to experience this stuff. Here's something you're going to face a lot. I face this a lot already working on loneliness and isolation. People will say, either I want to be left alone, or they'll say, well, I have a brother, sister, mom, uncle, aunt, child, colleague, and they tell me they want to be left alone. I understand. Can I tell you from my personal experience how often I've told people I want to be left alone when what I'm actually saying is, please, please, I need your help. I am lonelier than I've ever been, and I don't know how to ask. So first of all, people say things they don't mean. Okay, that's okay. Right? And then secondly, that's very different, alcoholism or other addictions and how people are isolated. But in terms of interventions, we all have people in our lives who've struggled with addictions at some point, and they were really struggling. And someone said, I want to arrange an intervention. We're going to go. Is the logic of an intervention the person wants to be intervened? In one sense, no. Does it mean you're dishonoring them by intervening even if they say no? No, you're saying, I hear what you're saying. I honor your rationality, your rational desire to be left alone. I love you. I don't want you to leave. I'm a dad, right? Who here on the phone would be like, well, rationally, I'm gonna let my kid, whatever. You're going to do anything you can to save your child. We're at a point now where the world is saying, focus on this. AI can replace this. You know what can't be replaced? You. You know what can't be replaced? Your love and kindness to your kids, to your aunt, to your uncle, to that friend at work who you're like, maybe they might be sad. Maybe they're not. How do you know? Give them a word of kindness. You will feel better. They're fine. They're married. You find out they have 48 friends. They like run a social connection awareness group. Great. Not the point. The point is help them. Help them break the conventions that somebody said, probably a guy, probably focused on money, the conventions that aren't based in science, that aren't true about who we are. AA has one of the best models about how to love people in tricky situations. I've been to 2 AA meetings, some of the best organized events I've ever been to in my life. I felt more, love from guys who I had just met, it was mainly men at this one event I went to, and then some of the best organization, respectful. And a key thing that they talked about, I'm trying to emulate in my Togetherland work, is the sponsor idea. You have someone you're struggling with alcohol, you call them. Well, when my situation happened and my wife left, I automatically did something that now I realized helped me, and I'm hoping it can help other people. It's kind of like Dr. Murthy's thing. I identified 5 people. It was my mom, my brother, my friend Rich, a couple other friends, and I would call them every day. They were my sponsors. They were my loneliness sponsors. They were my keeping me alive and safe sponsors when I just was a raw, open wound, and I understood I had to still function. I couldn't get on every call and cry, etc. And this, I do want to wrap up pretty quickly with an exercise before I finish. But I recognized when I say the word equip, the burning need and opportunity we have to recognize our own triggers. What's your trigger, right? Your loneliness trigger. And I say loneliness because this is an emotion. You get hungry, you get thirsty, you get lonely. It just happens. It's part of the fabric of who we are. Dipping into isolation is when, either self-perceived or real, we don't have social connections we feel we can call on. I told you about my array of social connections. I got lucky, thank God, that I knew to call these loved ones. I didn't know it, I just had to. But I want to create ways for you, for anyone. This is part of the mission I have right now in my adult life, is to tell people, are you equipped to know when a trigger happens? Avoid going into that place that I go to still all the time of low self-esteem, saying, how did I screw up my marriage? How did I screw up that book? I'm bad. I'm fat. I'm this. Fine. All these things where I can work on those things and aspects of working on them, setting goals, great. But here's the thing, you have worth because you can give kindness to someone else. Never keep your pain from reminding you that you might be the person that could save someone's life or make it better. So if you recognize these triggers, I'm lonely, normal, but I'm dipping into a trigger area. That can be a certain person's coming over, it's a holiday and family is a struggle. You're around alcohol, whatever it is. It's not a judgment of the trigger, but if you know the trigger and you're equipped, I equate it to saying, boom, I cut my finger. I don't have to think about finding a Band-Aid. The Band-Aid's in the second drawer. Oh, I cut my finger. Boom, find the, boom, there it is, right? It doesn't have to be a big, mournful, huge thing. A trigger happens. Am I going to go to a place of low self-worth, low self-esteem, consciously or unconsciously? I don't need to if I can say, when I help someone else, I automatically feel better. Trigger happens, boom. I go over to Bob. Hey, Bob, I really enjoyed the presentation you gave today, right? But I'm doing that for 2 reasons. One is to hopefully help Bob, but I'm doing it to help myself. And I've had many conversations. There's whole books on altruism. Is it wrong to help someone else because you're doing it to help yourself? All due respect, and the academic discourse around that makes for a great book. Kind of who cares? You want to know why? The science shows either way, both of our well-being goes up. I'm not saying go over and be like, I'm going to be kind to this person for my monetary means. I mean, if you're being kind to someone else because you know it's going to help you, that's part of the solution, joyfully. All right, this is just saying I've written books about tracking well-being and your values. I can tell you more about that as time allows. This is my second to last slide, and then I'll be finished by noon, which I think is still time for Q&A from noon to 12:30. This works. You want to hear some great news? Being kind works. What? In Frome, little village, well, it's not that little, but part of Somerset, England, way back in like 2011, this brilliant woman, Dr. Kingston, another hero, was charged with lowering, and data scientists on the call will appreciate this, how hard this is if you work in the medical arena, lower healthcare costs, specifically visits to the emergency room. In the United States, that's the biggest cost, or it was for a while, cost center, emergency room visits. Not just monetary, this happened in COVID. There aren't enough people to take care of everyone, right? It's a big deal. So what she did is 3 steps. Step 1, she identified community resources that already existed: churches, temples, bowling alleys, pubs, restaurants, places people already went. Brilliant. Then she kind of switched around conventions, and she called things like a talking cafe, same restaurant, but she gave permission in a convention to change things. This was the permission, the conventional permission. Call it a talking cafe. And you know what people did? They had yoga classes there. They played canasta. It's England. They probably did things like with Yorkshire pudding and such. And I love Brits. I lived in London for 6 months in college. So they did all the things that Brits do together. And you know what else they did? They trained people. They equipped people. 2 hours of training, active listening, really hearing people. And then the people were trained. As you talk to someone, give them knowledge about where to go for these approved, medically, community, whatever approved places they can go. So I'm talking with someone, and when I hear a trigger, right, or something they say, Susan's talking, not Susan, Christine is talking to me, and I go, I'm in Somerset. Oh, you should go to the Talking Cafe. There it is. There's the intervention, right? So again, you name the community resources, you give people permission to address these things that they normally wouldn't, and then you train people in active listening, and these 700 volunteers help people go to these talking cafes. If there were more extreme things, that could be, given help to go to a mental health specialist. And then by 2013, this community decreased by 17% hospital admissions, while all around them physically, same basically people, right? Somerset, Frome is here, the next place is here. 29% increase in those costs. Why? Because they recognized and they leveraged the spirit of connection. Oh, this can't happen, right? I can give you 48 examples of pharmacology and technology saying, how do we address this? This, and they might do great things. Wonderful. But here they did it for free. All right, I see Susan. So here, my last slide, if I can. And Susan, if you allow me just 2 minutes, this is the last slide. First of all, thank you all for listening. And second of all, Dr. Murthy used this as an exercise on a podcast called On Being with Krista Tippett. If you don't know it, it's absolutely wonderful. If you're comfortable, before we finish, wherever you're listening, please raise your right hand and place it over your heart and close your eyes. And again, this is if you're comfortable. I'm quoting from Dr. Murthy here. I want you to think about the people who have loved you over the years, the people who have been there for you during difficult times, who have supported you without judging you, and who stood by your side even when it was hard. Feel their love flowing through you, lifting you up, brightening your mood, and filling your heart, and know that that love is always there, even if they're not physically with you. And know that you are and are always will be worthy of that love. It came to you because you deserved it. And now open your eyes. What you felt in that brief meditation, I'm reading from my quote on my phone, that was the power of love. That's the power of social connection, and it's our birthright. We are designed to experience this. Regardless of what walk of life we're in, we have the ability to shine a light on the bright spots. And I want all of you to know, and this is him saying this, but I feel the same way, just as I want my own children to know, just as I remind myself as well, that we are all worthy of love and connection, even in those moments when we feel that perhaps we aren't. The truth is, we are not alone. There are others out there who want what we want, a world that is more connected, a world where we can actually be there for one another, a world that is actually powered by love. Let's be awkward for purpose. together. Thank you.
Thank you so much, John. What a great way to start our week. ESIP is a community, and that's usually one of the first things I say when describing ESIP. People come to me and say, "Oh, you're a professional association or you're a nonprofit organization," and I usually always start with ESIP is a community, and we support each other technically, but we also support each other personally, and sometimes working in the space and the field that we all work in, it can be really intense. AGU had a workshop that was phenomenal on climate grief, right? A lot of the people in the ESIP community, right? Like you're looking at wildfire data all day long, or you're looking at a tropical storm intensifying, or you're looking at the world from a different perspective, and it can be really intense. And I love that as a community we can give each other resources and support to grapple with some of these great challenges. So we have about 10 minutes for questions for John. And I see you guys are doing your usual thing. The Slido is super active, and there are many questions in there. You can put in questions, you can vote up questions. John, I'm going to start with one question. And this is the ESIP team, right? I listed all the states we're in. So, given that people, including in this community, are remotely working since the pandemic or hybrid working, how does this contribute to the loneliness epidemic?
And can you still hear me?
Yep.
Okay. From my understanding, a lot, COVID amplified apparently the isolation. And I'll keep saying that word, loneliness is just something that happens. I'm hungry right now because lunch is coming up soon. Loneliness, you might watch a movie, I feel lonely. Isolation is that dip that's conscious or unconscious. And when one is alone, that can often be a trigger in the sense of everything from just like physically, I don't feel like going out tonight. Or the reason I brought up Somerset was if there aren't those established conventions giving you permission and an invitation, no matter who you are, then staying alone can be either a temptation or something you can't avoid, like with COVID. So now things like the work I'm doing in Togetherland, I'm trying to think how to partner with places like Uber and Lyft to train people in that active listening so that anytime you get in the Uber, someone can love on you. Restaurants, trying to work with Uber Eats. So anywhere you go in the world, you're at home alone, you want to get food, well, go and have a conversation with strangers, right? Same thing, Uber Eats comes to your house, you're shut in, whether you're an elderly person, a teenager, whatever, that person comes to your house, they give the food and they're trained with some kind of appropriate kindness where you don't freak the person out. These are all conventions. I don't know if they're going to work, but we have to try. So the science does say, though, that social media and being alone has increased isolation, but we also have new tools like this one. It's still useful to be talking to people in these social circles. The being with other people is still a big deal. The skin touch, the pheromonal stuff I mentioned, but it's mainly about having social connection where you have someone to call on, even if you're using Zoom.
Yep. We actually were just talking about that on a staff call earlier this week, right? The ESIP team only sees each other in person a couple of times a year, but there was some interaction that we had where I was really in awe of how this technology actually still makes me feel like we know each other really well. So I guess this kind of goes to what you were mentioning with Uber Eats, and the question is, how do we scale caring? Can it be scaled, or is it always a one-on-one interaction?
Well, that's a great question. We can definitively scale caring. By the way, I just put a paper in called Prioritizing People and Planet as the Metrics for Responsible AI. So well-being for AI versus risk has been something I've been working on since 2017. I led an event with the OECD at the EU Commission. I can tell you more about that if you're interested. A lot of the permission I'm trying to figure out, and I welcome you, Susan, your work with ESIP. It's a wonderful organization to ask for. And I really do appreciate, it's not like it was fun for me to talk about certain things I shared with you all. I'm trying to understand how to be awkward, where in one sense, awkward is what are things I don't normally get to hear about. And you said some amazing things. A lot of organizations don't do land acknowledgements, for instance. And you bring up anything about First Nations, and there's this like, so one thing I'll say is about how do we have kindness is work with your DEI teams, diversity, equity, inclusion. And that's one reason I'm so impressed with this organization and want to work on Jedi principles, because Jedi principles are I'm being very minimalistic to a massive field that's glorious and wonderful and complex, is like saying, hey, it's okay if you don't understand what it means that your whiteness means you're more privileged than anyone else. Like the book White Fragility, it's a great book to read. And by the way, I'm feeling a little bit like, should I be saying that now? But what I recognize for myself, especially once I heard the poet and writer Ta-Nehisi Coates talk about the Black body, I didn't know what that meant. And I didn't know how my privilege meant that it's invisible to me, but it's not invisible to, and I say this with respect to you, Susan, all the women on the phone, everyone, women in my life. One of the reasons I respect women, and most of my heroes are women, Rand Eisler, economists like Eleanor Ostrom, is because they're the ones that remind us, hey, everybody, why is there a glass ceiling and whatever else? Newsflash, who didn't sign the Declaration of Independence? Any of the ladies. Who didn't sign the Declaration of Independence? Anyone of color, any First Nations folks. So kindness is also like an awareness. But the reason I say be awkward is because I am less interested now. I don't want to be rude. I don't want to be arrogant. I don't want to say I don't care what anybody has to say. But I will say, if there's not a kindness at the core of it, like Susan, you talked about your friend, the capital E, small e, I'll call it a spirit of like a sort of like this face, like, and now for me, I am a white dude, but I sort of look at people and I'm like, you got the white dude nod going, which is I'm not equipped to change. So I'm trying to come from a place of love. Like 2014, that book, a lot of anger, data, we don't have access to it, right? Now I'm trying to come to the place of, I know this is what the science says. Every person I talk to has a kid or an uncle or someone they care about. Care starts with me. But the larger version of it is support changing conventions that don't prioritize care. That is what we can do.
Oh, it's a lot to take in. And then I'm looking at our questions, and we have so many good ones and not a ton of time. So I'm going to go with Bob Chen's question of there are at least two models for overcoming isolation. Quote, it takes a village approach versus, quote, pack mentality. How does this play into current social polarization?
Oh, fantastic question. And I have like
Right?
40 books at home. I still need to read. There's one next to my bedside table. It's called Cast, CST. It was a couple of years ago. It was very popular. I'll answer it this way, which is the upcoming election. Part of the reason I have this urgency for this work is, and I'm not going to talk about any political names except to say that we are coming to a place of such vast social disconnection in this election that if we don't have tools to know how to talk to our colleagues and each other, whether it's pack mentality or whatever that we approach it, I don't see for myself how I don't just go into places of rage and say, you believe in this person, I believe in this person, right? Versus, hey, are you okay? Those three words are kind of, I think, the best way to start in any setting, either an individual person to person, so pack mentality or whatever else. And I forget your colleague's name who asked the question. It's a great question. And if you have any books I can read, I want to learn. But I will say in my own life, for colleagues where I work, places where I go around my town, the are you okay question up here means you are thinking from here. And then when you allow yourself to know, because you can know this now, if you didn't know this before this call and you trust the Surgeon General, I'm not saying you have to like the guy, but unless you're a medical scientist, like, and you have, Murthy is wrong. In one sense, kind of who cares, said with respect, because he's giving me and you all permission to go, if I take the extra time to just pause and take someone in and think, are you okay? And then I pause and I'm there, I'm present with them in the moment. It will help you as much as them. It just does. That's the science. So I say that with respect to your last colleague's question. Call it what we will. As a rule, Westerners, myself included, I like wrote books. I wrote 2 books, and then I read books, and I work with all these colleagues, and blah, 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 blah. And then I say to myself, and every day I will encounter many humans. I won't have time for every single last one of them to say, "Are you okay?" But when I make the time to say, "Are you okay?" and I listen, sometimes they aren't. And then you have to sit for maybe 5, 10 minutes. And that's 5 to 10 minutes that you didn't have, but you will maybe save them or equip them. And do you start to get why that's more important than productivity? AI is going to replace us. Habiti, habiti. How about care? How about we prioritize care? What do you think about care? How about care for our kids and our planet?
Yep, absolutely. Well, I am going to let John off the hot seat. Thank you very, very much. There are phenomenal questions in Slido. And fortunately, we have a coffee break this afternoon. And I would love the individuals of the community. I know John has to run. We hope he'll pop in later this week. But I think that some of these questions in Slido are ones that we as a community could wrestle with in the coffee break. So I invite you to come to that this afternoon and to take a virtual meeting and make it a little bit more interactive and conversational in that way, maybe a little less isolated also. So thank you, John. And then if we could get our board panel spotlighted of Denise Hills, ESIP's president, Douglas Rao, ESIP's Vice President, Ruth Doerr, ESIP's Treasurer, and Steve Diggs, I am thrilled to announce, is, as of last week, our newly elected chair of our Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, and Justice Committee, and he is a new ESIP board member as a result of that. I forgot that I would get to announce that as having Steve on the panel. Wonderful. So thank you guys all for being here with us today. And I wanted to start with John's opening remarks, right? And then I wanted to bring ESIP leadership into the discussion as we think about, okay, what opportunities do we as an organization have to wrestle with the question of data ethics and trust and collaboration? What is our role as a community, and what is our unique opportunity in that way? So I wanted to start off generally by just kind of letting each of you reflect on, what does data ethics mean to you in your work? Perhaps how do you know if you're ethical, and what does it mean to you? And I'm going to let Douglas kick us off.
Right. Thanks, Susan. And since we're in the land of inspiring quote, I'm going to use one of the quotes to start things with, which is my favorite person in the world, like Jane Goodall, and who's going to be 90 this year in April. And her quote is that only if we understand can we care, only if we care, we will help. Only if we help, we shall be saved. And I met Jen while I was volunteering with student groups in college. And that, I think the general quote can really apply to a lot of things we do here in the ESIP community, from understand to the care route, to understand the importance of data for the entire society and for those challenging societal issues. And going back to more specific things that I am doing, one thing that I'm working with ESIP community is the data readiness cluster, where we're looking at how do we define what do we mean by AI ready data. One part of it is really specific about data quality and how the quality of those data that are being used by a lot of the AI practitioners into the development of those AI models, not just for large language model, but more general the AI applications, how that affect how can we eliminate bias, identifying the bias in those through some tools that the community can develop. So that's one specific aspect. The other one is that although we talk a lot about data, but we still have a large gap in the data for a large part of the world in talking about mental health. And there's not really mental health data for the Southern Hemisphere in those underdeveloped regions and countries and tribal nations. So really, how can we use those data collection and technology innovations to improve our understanding of other parts? One specific part of my research project is how can we combine satellites measurements as well as those ground measurements to fill in the gaps of the environmental information, like the climate data set from temperature, precipitation, and other environmental indicators, to help to inform people to plan for those future and address adaptation and mitigation type of problem. So I'm just gonna stop there. I know there's other really diverse perspectives on the panel right now.
Yeah. Ruth, what about you? You're muted.
All right. Sorry about that. So I guess where I've been working lately is with the Sustainable Data Management Cluster on what does a repository need to do to become a caring repository, where here I'm talking about care in the sense of the indigenous data principles, of care. It's really all about communities and how do you respect communities and respect community needs and help communities do what they need to do to survive into the future, etc. So that's one area. And then the other area that I spent a lot of time in it is actually in semantics, in the sense of when we're talking, we're quite often talking right past each other because we're not using the same terms. And yes, this applies to data as well as everything else in life. And in data, that has a major impacts, because if you're not really using the same terms, then you're not really being able to compare that data to other data, because you may not even know that they aren't the same thing. Anyway, so those are the two areas that I'm thinking most about these days.
Excellent. Thank you. Steve, what about you?
It's interesting to listen to our opening plenary speaker, because it took me right back to where do data come from? And for the people who are really old in the crowd, you may remember something called the Nielsen ratings. And, did anybody know a Nielsen family? And I didn't know a Nielsen family, and no one I knew Nielsen family. And yet there were data being collected on what came into our homes, what was broadcast, the products we would buy and sell. And if we know if those data are slightly skewed, it's not representative, right? So certainly my neighborhood wasn't represented from the Nielsen families. Interesting note is the Nielsen families originally kept a diary and submitted it, a handwritten diary. So those notes are somewhere. And that takes me all the way up to today. And this isn't a jump in logic. With AI and why we fear it. I think why some people fear it is, and I think we know, is because AI is not something that's alien to us. It is us. We train our models on data we produce. And if we don't, getting back to what Douglas was talking about, if those data that we train them on are quality, then we get an undesirable result. If those data are not inclusive, as what Ruth talked about, then we know that we're not representing a certain segment of society. So I think that ESIP is uniquely positioned to ensure that those things happen. I can say that I see this landscape changing, because even at University of California, there is a class for graduate students only called Ethical and Professional Science. And one of the words that they use in there, that these are survival skills. I think in the context of the class, they mean survival skills for the individual scientist. I think in the broader context, it's survival skills for us as a community.
Wow, I love that. And Denise, what about you?
Wow, there's just so much to think about, both from John's plenary and what other people have already said on this panel. As many of you know, I am not in academia, so I tend to have a little bit different view on how some of these ideals can come into play when you're working in a private sector environment or working with private sector folks. And I loved how Ruth talked about we need to keep community needs in mind. And so when we're talking about ethics, Pierre put this in chat, and I'm going to steal it because I liked it. I really like it. Ethics is not the same as ideals or ideology. And coming back to something that Susan said, I am not a data ethics expert, but that doesn't mean I'm not affected by it. That doesn't mean I can't care about it, that I can't think about how it needs to be implemented. Some of the early chat conversation was talking about, it's like, how do you build trust? And I was seeing transparency and openness. But how do you build trust when you can't be as open? Data privacy is a big thing, you know. We tend to think of that with medical data, but there's other instances where that privacy is important. And so how do you balance the ethics of data privacy with the ethics of data openness and transparency? And so sometimes you just kind of explain the biases or the limitations, and that can help. But to me, it's a very interesting space to be in. And kind of connecting that to what John was talking about, he always said, he was saying, ask, are you okay? Sometimes we just need to ask the questions that we don't think immediately to ask, like, what are the limitations? What are the restrictions? What are the biases that are already built into your data? So kind of trying to bring it all together.
Nope. And I love it. Kathy just put a comment in the chat. I should have Kathy be the moderator of the session, knowing where I was going to go next. And we can continue the discussions over coffee. So at ESIP, right? Like, what can we do, right? Like, there are things as a community that we can't do, right? But maybe your individual organizations can. And then there are things that we as a community uniquely can do. Denise will be sharing more, but we're in the process of starting to look at our next strategic plan, our next batch of strategic themes, right? Like, where does this fall into that? So for each of you, and I'll let you maybe raise your hand when you're ready to answer. What do you see? I'm kind of comboing the last two questions because of time. What do you see as the most urgent thing that in this space, and potentially that thing that we that fits with ESIP, right? Given our cross sector and our cross agency nature, where do you think ESIP could have the biggest impact, or what would be a good starting point? So what's the most urgent, and what's the best? What should ESIP do about it? It's a tough question. There are no right answers. Take it away, Steve.
Sure. If you can't get a good idea, go with a bad one so everybody else looks better. So I think that one of the things that, where ESIP has been laboring, and it's actually within our wheelhouse and something we're good at, it's in our DNA, it's open data. Closed data, when we can actually cast that as something that's unethical. If you were to take data that's paid for by the federal government, make money off of it, and then embargo it or improve it. Let's say you do quality control. And there is an instance of this with the Army Corps of Engineers with coastal survey data, taking it, digitizing it, and then reselling it. And then the only improved data you get is one that somebody makes a profit from. That may be problematic and could veer into the unethical. It certainly is not optimal for people doing geoscience, is to have a paywall to the best data set.
Yep, I think Ruth has something she wants to add to that.
Yeah, sorry, but I had to add the word ethically open data because, yeah, okay, you get it, I'm sure. But so the cluster I've been working with has been working with an indigenous data group, and there is a lot of time where that group has legitimate reasons for not wanting to share things because they've been misused in the past. And let's face it, it's probably going to take generations to rebuild that kind of trust. So, anyways, Douglas has his hand up.
Douglas.
Right, I think maybe I would broaden it a little bit more beyond just ESIP community, but more those professional societies and other places where different community gathers. Like really, so last year AG hosted ethical principles for AI workshop, and one of the conversations that the debate between do things fast versus do things right. And with the shiny object effects, a lot of technologies is really getting and really a lot of investment in doing those. And how can we ensure we're doing the development in the right way and to mitigating the risk? And there's a guideline document have been published open access to everyone who want to see it, ethical principles in the AI research in the earth and space sciences. And the other thing is that Kathy posed a question in the chat where how do we do those things? And the cluster that she is leading is spin off from the Environmental Data Science Summit from Santa Barbara last year, looking at how can we operationalize that discussions we just had about ethics in the environmental data sciences. So everyone should check that out.
And Denise, I'll let you have the final word. And there's some great things in chat that you all should check, and we'll make the chat available.
Yes, Kathy kind of summed up what I was going to say, in response somewhat to what Douglas was saying is, you know, how can we move fast? Some of these issues are very time sensitive. Kathy sums this up, you know, and Ruth was saying, ethically open data, a lot of communities or people who have had their data misused don't have a whole lot of trust. So I'd really like to sum up, we need to move at the speed of trust. That makes it, that helps us be ethical in our choices, I think. Like I said, I have to give Kathy credit for that statement, but I think that's a really great way to sum up how ESIP can help, is that we can help move at the speed of trust in data ethics.
I love it. It's kind of a full circle moment for me. So at the event where I met John, we broke into 4 groups. One group was or was it 4 or 3? Well, one was working on decarbonization, one was working on AI, and one was working on DEI. There may have been a 4th, and if I forget it. And it struck me in that conversation as each group kind of reported out. The AI, the decarbonization group said, we can't move fast enough. It's so urgent. And the AI group said, we can't move fast enough. The field is evolving every day. And the DEI group almost said, we can't move slow enough, right? And I was struck by this complete polarization in the urgency, and we must move faster, and the knowledge that to be truly inclusive and to make sure all voices are at the table, we have to move very intentionally, and sometimes that is slower than these other pressures we feel, right? And so that's what we wrestle with every day, right? And that's what we have in this community. And I'm glad it's not a challenge that any of us has to figure out alone, right? That's why we have each other. That's why we have a place where we can come together. So so thank you for that, and thank you to our panel. Like I said, a good opening plenary. Just, you know, I hopefully leave you wanting more, leave many questions unanswered that we can talk about in our coffee break this afternoon. So I want to say thank you to John, Denise, Douglas, Steve, and Ruth. I hope that everyone has a great week. Be sure to join us, as I said, in our coffee break this afternoon, where we can continue this conversation. That will be a great time. We're using Zoom this year for our coffee break, so it'll feel a little different. Wonder went away, unfortunately. And then another event I want to bring to your attention is our Research Showcase poster event. That is tomorrow afternoon at 4 p.m. Eastern. We moved it up in the day a little bit, giving you back your evening time. The poster session and the Research Showcase is a great venue to have small group conversation, to meet new people, and to go more in depth on a wide range of topics. And we know that that's something that can be hard to do in a virtual meeting. So I look forward to seeing you there, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much, everyone.